Welcome to What's My Thesis. I'm Javier Proenza, and today my guest is Matt Stromberg. Writes for The Guardian, the Hyperallergic, most first and foremost, The Guardian, Carla, LA Times, and I'm definitely interested in a little bit about your background as we start. But you gave me a little rundown of what we're going to talk about, and I'm really excited. So I want to tease that a little bit. We're definitely going to be talking a little bit about what's happening at USC campus or at all the campuses, but UCLA and USC are currently the most headline grabby kind of situations because there's an escalation, seems to be. But before we get into that, I definitely wanted to get a little bit about your background and how does somebody get into writing about art?
Yeah. So I grew up in New York in a pretty art supportive household, going to see a lot of art as a kid. Studied art history at Wesleyan, undergrad, and I think my first semester or second semester, art since 45 just blew my mind. Had a great professor. Shout out John Pauletti, who I think just retired a few years ago.
This was at Wesleyan?
Yeah.
Okay.
And Frank Stella just died, so I've been thinking a lot about that and his, I don't know if it's cliche or not, but like his black paintings were like pretty formative for me.
Well, there's truth in cliches, right?
And I've since I grapple with minimalism a lot and have expanded.
So that was your first love?
Well, in college, it was kind of the first thing that expanded my perception of what art could be and what it could do.
What was it about minimalism? Was that your first exposure to it? Like you had a different understanding of what art was?
No, I couldn't understand it before.
Oh, really?
I think I was very frustrated and antagonistic towards it, which I think a lot of people are, and that's by design for some artworks. But just the lack of sentimentality, the lack of the artist's hand, the theatricality of it, as Michael Fried would say, in being critical of it. But I appreciated that about it. Tony Smith's Die was another seminal work for me.
So then, what were you studying in school? Art history?
Yeah, so I studied art history, and didn't know what I wanted to do, and moved to San Francisco and worked at a gallery, and very quickly realized I did not want to do that at all.
That's been covered on this show by a lot of people.
Yeah, it's tough, because we love art and we love going to galleries, but there's a lot of politics and labor issues and interpersonal issues that aren't always enjoyable or favorable or and there are a lot of great galleries, a lot of great dealers, but I think it's a small business, and anytime you have a small business, it's hard for everybody.
Would you say that Werner's and what's it called, your small business? Because I mean those are like 5 million and plus a year, right?
No, those not anymore. No. And maybe this is like the irony, is that working for the mega galleries, maybe, I don't know, people can write in or fact check me on this, but maybe that is excuse me, more desirable or more pleasant in a lot of ways, because it is more like a corporation and they do have
like a proper HR.
Exactly. Anyway. But I was very fortunate. I worked for a gallery that worked with a lot of good artists, and I appreciated that. But just the business side was not something I was that resonated with me, I guess.
Do you identify as a critic or are you an art writer? In a broader sense? I don't know if that is a distinction or not.
Yeah, no, for sure.
Because you do sometimes write about shows, but you write about broader art issues, right? So I don't know if that makes you more of an art writer.
Yeah.
I don't know how these subdivisions
That's true. I mean, when people ask me what I do and I say, oh, I'm an art writer, they say, oh, you're a critic. And I say, no, I do some criticism, but I, like for Hyperallergic, I mostly cover LA and Southern California art news.
Mm.
So that's news profiles, I do some features, previews of things. But I consider it like everything around the art.
Yeah, yeah.
So
like including things like Chris Pratt destroying a modern home, like right? Or you wrote a piece like that. I'm just so excited about how broad the scope is, because I mean, art criticism is great and all, but I really think that it's more of like a documentation of like community, right? Which is a lot of, I think, gives a much better context to what. You can talk about the art, but if you talk about the world the art exists in, that's a different specialization, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's all important.
Yeah,
I think criticism is like crucial to being in the art world or understanding art. And I do some criticism. I used to do more of it, but yeah, I the art world is not, the term the art world is such a like,
yeah.
it is and it isn't, right? Like it's part of the world.
Yeah.
So I think it creates this binary or this, exclusivity that may be too simplistic.
Yeah.
So I write about how art intersects with labor and real estate and gentrification and capitalism and education and identity and all this stuff.
Yeah, which are all features of the art world that I think most people, when they think of it, are like overlooking it. I think that like a lot of lay people get very angry about like bananas taped to walls and stuff. And I think that the kind of work you're doing sort of makes the whole world, the whole scene seem more accessible and more human, as opposed to like, what is this crap?
That's good to hear.
Well, so then I'm sorry. What was the first thing that you ever wrote art related was?
That's a good question. Like for money.
Yeah. I mean,
so I was living in
for pleasure first, and then when you went big time.
Well, I was living in San Francisco. I quit my gallery job. I was kind of bouncing around. I think I started writing for a website called Art Practical. That was started 20 something years ago. And yeah, just doing reviews of shows, and it was great. Really good place to just cut my teeth and get out there and.
Did you know? Was it instant? Like, all right, this is it.
No, because that was a long time ago. I kind of bounced around, did a lot of things. I played in bands. I did a million things in San Francisco. So.
Did you stumble into this?
I wouldn't say I stumbled into it, but it took me a while to. The runway was pretty long.
Okay,
we'll say that. And then I moved to LA in 2011 and went to the USC. It was an arts journalism master's program.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, it's a 9-month quick boot camp. So I did that and graduated 2014, and that's when I kind of hit the ground more seriously. Yeah. Hyperallergic. I think I started writing for Hyperallergic before I graduated, maybe, and so that's been pretty consistent.
How do you like it there?
It's good. I mean, they're great publication, great.
They're willing to go places that other publications are not, especially in relation to the broader topic, which is one thing that I've started to really respect about them.
Yeah, I think they have a very broad strategy, so they do proper criticism, right? But a lot of it is about art's intersection with everything else in the world.
Yeah. No, for sure. What, like, if you got to pick your favorite thing to write about, like if you could narrow down your beat to like one thing, what is your favorite? Like when when someone assigns you something, or when you get an idea for a story, like, or do people assign stories to you?
Oh yeah.
Okay. Is there something that like goes ding? I'm like, oh yeah, I can't wait to.
That's a good question. I mean, it's such a broad, canvas or spectrum that I kind of write about, and a lot of the stuff I like some of the things I cover are important, and
Uh-huh.
I'm glad to be writing about them, but it's not always a pleasurable experience.
I'm sure.
So like I cover, this is a while ago, but I covered a lot of the struggles over gentrification
Uh-huh.
in Boyle Heights.
Yeah.
This is like 10 years ago or something, when galleries were moving into the kind of more industrial part of Boyle Heights, but it was adjacent to residential areas, and neighborhood activists were outraged and very organized to get them out. It was a very public campaign.
Yeah.
So I wrote 5 or 6 stories about that. And
there was like vandalism of shows.
yeah,
too,
there was
right?
some
Like,
vandalism.
yeah.
And yeah, I tried to convey it in a nuanced. I tried to capture the nuance and the complex nature of what was going on, not just reproduce a binary of like gallery's bad, activist good, or vice versa.
Yeah.
And I had complicated feelings about it, and
Yeah.
so
It's something that I'm sure like you haven't even resolved yet, because that is one of the things that gentrification intersection is something that artists are always kind of like, because for them it's like, oh, where's the cheap space, right? They're not necessarily like but then there are developers that exploit them. I've definitely seen like art openings at places that are like, oh, this is like to culture it up a little bit. But
yeah, I mean, it's a cycle we've seen play out in cities for 50, 60 years, right? Where artists are the leading edge of development, or can be, and they move into an area that's undesirable or cheaper or has larger spaces. And like you said, developers seize on that as the next big thing, and
dollar signs in their eyes.
Yeah. So, and then artists are priced out and driven out of this area that they helped make popular. So it's they're I think in a lot of ways artists and galleries in the art world are complicit, but also victims of this cycle. So it's not a clear cut.
And then there's also a slightly like weird class element, because there is something about deciding that you're an artist, that to be able to block out labor that is just for creating work as opposed to like survival and whatnot is like it adds an interesting layer to that whole
absolutely
that balance.
So a big question I ask, and I think maybe in some of the stories, is how can you be part of a community responsibly, I guess.
Yeah.
Or how can you, be an artist responsibly in a city where.
That's a lot of good questions in there.
So yeah, I think probably that idea is something I've covered in different ways.
Do you have like maybe a framework that you think is it, like a broad one, just sort of like what like points to keep in mind when you're being an artist that might help artists have more of a. I don't mean to put you on the spot.
Before you even finish that, I was going to be like, nope.
Okay, then we can go on to something else.
But well, yeah. But I think there are things. I think keeping your impact in mind is always important, and knowing that you're not. This is part of the thing about the art world not being separate from the world, right? Like,
yeah.
What is your impact on your neighbors, on your community? Because you're not isolated. So even if you don't intend to have an effect, you do, right?
Yeah.
And it doesn't mean you shouldn't go into certain places or, open up a gallery, open up a studio, but like you need to be cognizant of what effect you're having in that area. And, I'm not going to tell people to do certain things with that knowledge, but that, that's the starting point, I guess. Is to be aware of it.
No, it's hard. It definitely is one of the things that I decided early on was to never shout out what neighborhood I'm in, And years later, I feel not responsible for all the galleries that are opening up around here. But you know, like, because I remember back in the day, Mark Maron used to be like, what's it called? What is it? He was in Highland Park, and he owned a house, and he was just constantly like, Highland Park is, you know? And I'm like, oh man, I don't want to price myself out of my own neighborhood.
Yeah, exactly. And so, you know, I mean, I think there's a responsibility also with policy, you know, policymakers, and you know, city and county authorities who regulate
and they
real estate stuff.
And they tend to be on the side of the developers, especially.
Sure. But I think, you know, this is where activism comes in and trying to influence those kinds of policies as far as rent control and, you know, things like that. Because that has a huge impact on.
Oh, there's no way I'd be here if if it wasn't for rent control. Yeah. Well, you're saying a couple things that I think tie up together nicely, which is specifically the art world is not separate from the real world, right? Which I think. Well, yeah. What's real, man? We can get all Foucault about it, but so what I'm interested in is hearing a little bit more about that from your perspective, because I do think that the art world kind of tries to brand itself as a little bit separate, right? Which is great for from a marketing standpoint, especially if you're like probably trying to get collectors to feel like they're part of something, right? You kind of have to create value for people in those places. Yeah. But right now we're kind of having an interesting situation where the real world and a lot of the rhetoric coming from like academic institutions that are very much anti-colonialism and all of that, and then we're seeing the reality of where that rhetoric ends and the rubber meets the road. So I just find, like I was reading your article about did you actually go out and interview the students at the places, or?
The USC, UCLA story? Yeah. So I went to USC, and my colleague Angela Davignon went to UCLA.
Okay.
And I couldn't really talk to students there because they had a very structured media relations protocol. Yeah, which is smart.
That's amazing. Yeah.
But it was funny. The day before, Angela was like, "Oh, I'm going down to World of Hats to get a press hat made." And I was like, "Oh, can you get me one?" And so I met her there, and it actually was really handy because I showed up at the encampment and I was kind of milling around and it identified me as a member of the press. And not just some creep.
Is it the old school one with the like little piece of paper?
No, I thought about that. No, it's just like a fedora. With the little press. And the camera with the flash bulbs. No, it was just a baseball hat with press embroidered.
Yeah,
on the
that's
top.
pretty cool.
Yeah,
but even there, just like thinking back on that fedora, like that was I feel like just the whole realm of journalism has changed so much even from those days, right? Because it used to be like I know Matt Taibbi in Twitter Files is a controversial figure, but he talked a lot about how like it used to be a muckraker kind of profession. It was like class wise, most of the journalists were coming from the working class, whereas now we're going to Columbia School of Journalism. Yep. A lot of people are coming out from those schools, and it's not necessarily the same economic class that's getting into these places. So their interest is not necessarily in challenging their own class interests at a certain point, right? Like, which is kind of a little bit what you're seeing here with. Did you see the clip of the woman of the president of Colombia? I forget who the congressman was, but it was like. He was like asking about, he was like, in the Bible, it says that if you go against Israel, do you saw this clip?
No. Was it Mike Johnson? Was it the Speaker of the House?
No. It was, I forget who it was, but so he was like basically apparently a Bible passage says that if you go against Israel, like you will be cursed. And he goes, do you want your school to be cursed by God of the Bible? And basically she was just like, no, I don't want the school to be cursed, as if she's like actually considering that as a possibility in her decision making process, which was really interesting. But yeah, so what, like, can you maybe define that relationship between that the art world and the real world, and when that starts to clash? Because it like, what do you think, like, what do you think of when you think of art world, especially somebody that writes about it? It's an interesting thing because, you know, I had I think you were from you know Skip Snow.
Yeah.
I had him on, and he was talking about how there's the art industry, there's the art community, and then there's the art, right, as three separate entities, which is an interesting way of formulating. But I was wondering how you subdivide, you know,
I
that.
mean, I just think of I think of it as art worlds, I guess, as opposed to the art world, because there's so many, you know, different ways people experience and interact with art. You know, what people think of as the art world is a very narrow, almost a parody of, you know, the black turtleneck downtown gallery scene, right? But there's, you know, public art, there's gallery spaces, there's artist run spaces, nonprofits, DIY pop-ups, you know. So like, yeah, I just think it's a very reductive way to think about it. I started a spreadsheet of all the art spaces in LA.
Oh wow.
Maybe a year or two ago. Yeah. It's very rough, but it was just like, so I could keep track of them. Not like shows that are happening, but just like, just so I could like scroll and be like, oh yeah, what's going on with that place? And I have like 390 now.
Wow.
And that's like formal galleries, artist run spaces, nonprofits, museums, cultural centers, in the greater LA area. So yeah, it's just a very diverse, you know, robust ecosystem, I guess. So yeah, I don't know. What was the question about the art world?
Well, no,
when it clashes with the real world.
Yeah, well, like, because I mean, I do think that most people that aren't active in the art world sort of think of themselves as separate, and I think a lot of artists also kind of think of themselves as separate from the real world. Because on some level, there's like an interest in things that most people aren't interested in, right? You know, like, and there is, and again, it goes a little bit towards that, like, you need time. Like, you if you're working 9 to 5, you can make art about that, but you also need the time to make art about that, you know? So it's not something that, so I think some people have even told me like, that's frivolous, you know?
Sure.
You know, and there's definitely those different perspectives on it. So what I'm interested in is a little bit, well, kind of like, you know, like, especially in the moment that we're having right now, where, you know, and I know that the stuff going on at USC is not specifically about, like, it's not just art people protesting, but I think that artists, you know, like, you mentioned something about the people saying that art is getting really political.
Yeah.
You know, and to me, that's fascinating. On the show, it comes up. I just met somebody new, and they started listening to the show. I was like, oh, the show is pretty political. Like, they were surprised, and I'm like, dude, art is political. Yeah. But, you know,
well, I mean, this is what part of what I emailed you was this conversation I was having with an artist friend who said art's getting really political, and I, you know, without even thinking, was like, all art's political, which is, you know, I think something I accepted a while ago. And I think it took me a while, because coming from like what I loved about minimalism or all that stuff was like, it doesn't have any connection to the world, which is not true. But
and in its own right, it's political, right? Like, you can totally break down. Yeah.
I mean, talking about Stella, like, he named some of his black paintings after Nazi concentration camps, like Arbeit macht frei, I think is one of his titles. So, you know,
I have to confess that during COVID, I was like, working really, really hard at Guitar Center and just getting my butt kicked because we were working with a skeleton crew, and in my head I was like, work will make me free, and I was like, holy shit, whoa, that got dark.
Yeah.
To just kind of push yourself. I don't know how appropriate it is to say that publicly, but yeah, it was one of those things where I'm like, whoa, I know where that's from. So yeah.
Yeah. And yes, Holocaust Remembrance Day.
Oh, is it today?
Today, yeah.
Oh,
so
yeah. Respect. I mean, yeah.
Anyway, so yeah, so all art is political, and then the protests around Gaza and Palestine and Israel, are not necessarily art focused, but I did bring up the artwork by Felix Gonzalez Torres called Forbidden Colors, which is red, green, white, I think black, monochrome paintings, squares. And, when I think of the monochrome, it's like the most pure form of universal abstraction, right? It's like no reference, just color. And these are called forbidden colors because it's the colors of the Palestinian flag, which were forbidden in Israel at that point. I think it was before the Oslo Accords. I think that's what changed it. But, so it was this very like clear, succinct, perfect refutation of the idea that, abstraction is not referential or political.
No,
because this is just four colors that are possibly like now some of the most contentious, the combination of them contentious colors in geopolitical events, right? And like especially on college campuses, like that's what we're seeing. So
circling back to because I really do find that the art world not being separate from the world an interesting idea, because one of the things that I've noticed is, and obviously, what happened on October 7th was not, or it was it October 7th, right? Yeah. Because you see here rhetoric. But yeah, one of the things that I find most interesting is that when that happened, there were a lot of public statements from galleries, open public statements. And then since then, there haven't been like solidarity statements continuing in that same vein. But
there were statements from galleries expressing solidarity with
Israel.
Okay.
Yeah. And I don't have, I mean, whatever. I'm not going to pick that apart, but I've noticed that there's also been an absence of that same solidarity with the Palestinian cause. So it's like a lot of, so I just find it interesting how, in that context, I feel like the art world is removing itself from, kind of putting up the barricades and sort of like, oh, we're going to stay out of this because this is way too much for us to handle, which plays into the idea of like, well, where does it stop being political,
Yeah. I mean,
and if you haven't found that to be the case, if you've seen a lot of spaces, because I know that you've covered Last Projects, who does, who has covered some of that. I'm talking more in the sense of like, there's just a deafening silence. Yeah, well, I don't want to name who was who. I don't want to be like, oh, this gallery and this gallery were,
Well, I think this is where you get into the idea of art worlds, right?
Yeah,
and like, yeah, on a certain level, the commercial mainstream art world has either issued statements decrying violence against Israelis or in support of Israel or whatever. But I did a story or a couple stories about art, more like art spaces that have come out expressing solidarity with Palestinians. So like Last Projects was in that. Zach Foyer, the dealer, gallerist in New York, was in that. Can't remember who else, but there was, a pretty vocal minority people who, and I think, we saw what happened with Art Forum, where that was they came out with a letter decrying violence in Palestine, and the editor got sacked over it, and right.
Wow. And yeah, I actually had not kept up with that.
Yeah, I mean, this was like right last November, I think, and or October even. And there have been, it's been very contentious. I think our artists. So Hyperallergic did a story about artists who expressed solidarity with Palestine, who had received blowback from that. And I think a lot of emerging artists were, or some of them were fearful that it would have an effect on their career and they'd be blackballed or blacklisted. More established artists or dealers or spaces had less to lose, or less, more to lose, but less possibility of losing it, I guess.
Yeah.
People have lost collectors, people have lost sales, but I think what we're seeing is alternate streams of support, or alternate streams of, I don't know, communal allyship, or other art worlds that are popping up that are more vocal about supporting Palestine.
Do you ever feel like a hesitancy or pressure or like, because I mean the stakes are high to speak out about certain things. Honestly, I am shocked at sort of the backlash that some of the protests are getting, even within the mainstream media. It's really like I'm definitely in solidarity, but it's difficult, especially since I do YouTube. Like I get scared of getting accused of like being anti something instead of just actually expressing my support for being pro, like people,
not being
slaughtered. Harmed. Anybody, like the humanization of all people is sort of what I'm interested in. Do you like, I mean, it's a tough thing to put yourself, which is what I really respect. And one of the reasons I was excited that you were interested in even talking about this, because I wouldn't have put this on you. And we can also veer away and stick to more broad topics.
I think we're both in agreement that we're not going to get into the geopolitical minutia of it, but as far as covering it, it's not something I would shy away from, because I'm not writing opinion pieces. Some people may disagree, but I think I have a pretty balanced, and that's not to say it's like giving equal platform to all sides, because I don't know, that argument is made like, well, if you give people fighting Nazis space, you have to give the Nazi space, and it's like, no, you don't really, you don't.
I'm with you on that.
But it's like I try to represent, like I said, with the Boyle Heights gentrification debates, I try to represent the complexity and the nuance of the situation, without simplifying it or dumbing it down, or making a advocacy piece. I don't think what I do is like advocacy journalism.
No, you definitely. Reading the having read the piece that we're specifically talking about, it's very matter of fact, and like, this is what's going on, and it is empathetic, I think, more than anything else, rather than propagandistic.
That's good. It's good to hear.
I actually really like your prose, by the way. That's
good to hear.
I went back and read a few things going in, and I'm like, oh, it's an easy read. It's like it's what's it called? It fits with the Hemingway's like show don't tell kind of thing, and keeping simple language.
Cool.
I mean, not to throw too much high praise at you, but you will take it.
I'll put that on my book jacket. I think I try to write for a general audience.
It's not hoity-toity, which I really appreciate.
Yeah, I'm not an academic. I'm not I don't consider myself a scholar.
Thank goodness.
I mean, scholars are great, but I'm a journalist. I consider myself a journalist. So
nice. Okay, so then, what do you think is So I think the broader thing that I want to kind of try to pivot to is sort of how people conceive of because I think that from what we've spoken off air, that we have a joyfully cynical view of the art world. Like we don't we. I feel like you kind of see it for what it is, right? And I think your different art worlds is a great analogy. But I think that like sometimes interviewing people, I'll come up against this resistance to the idea that maybe it's hard to do really radical art and really radical things that are change. And I talk to a lot of people that like that engage in activism, and a lot of that activism, which I think is totally valid, is empowering youth, teaching people outside how to verbalize and vocalize themselves. So within that context, like what is the range of what do you feel can be done within art that is like, what is accomplishable, and what is kind of limited by the reality of the art world or the art worlds that exist, especially when you're trying to climb the ladder outside of like maybe more community run spaces.
Mm-hmm. That's a good question.
Thank you. Every time you say that, I'm like, fuck yeah.
Yeah, Dan, I was thinking about this based on what we had corresponded about. And, so all art is political. Some art is more political than other art. So you have posters and graphics and banners that are at these encampments at USC, at UCLA, other schools. And so that's like one tier, right? And one of the professors at USC said he's trying to get some of that collected.
No, that's one of the things that I was excited about. Yeah. I'm like, someone's documenting this.
Hopefully. I mean, they just swept the USC camp yesterday at 5 a.m. So who knows how much actually saved. But, so there's that aspect. He mentioned, this professor, Andy Campbell, mentioned Sister Carita, who was a radical nun in LA in the 60s, who taught, as a teacher, an educator, and did silk screens, kind of pop inspired, using imagery from the everyday, but they were, she was very political. It was anti-war, anti-nuke, like, go down the list. And there's a center for her, she passed away many years ago, but there's a center for her in LA to kind of cement her legacy. And, so her work is protest graphics, but it, sold in galleries. It's not, like blue chip auction scene, but it's, it's fine art, I guess. Right.
Yeah. It runs in the circles.
Yeah. But, it has a foot in both worlds, I think. And it's beautiful. And then, there's stuff like I mentioned Mara Brewer's show at Canary Test, which is a great space kind of by the Bendix, south of downtown. And she did a film that basically looks at art as commodity and money laundering and free ports. And so she basically like takes a few $1,000s and like puts it in a bank in Switzerland or something and uses it to buy an artwork that lives in a free port, just like this. She went like deep. So she visits like these tax havens in like the Cayman Islands. I'm probably wrong about that, but somewhere in the Caribbean, and then goes to Switzerland and has Hong Kong is the other free port that a lot of
I thought that was a car.
A lot of people park their money in. So, just the whole idea of art as luxury good that, as like a stock that people just.
Yeah.
And then there's companies that you can buy like shares of a painting, right? So
I know and actually that's been popular on YouTube recently. They're like, art is a great place to put your money. I was like, oh, really? But it's funny that you bring that up, because now they have a little bit more of an air of legitimacy. Yeah. So you can buy a share of like what, like of a piece. Do you know any of these companies? I'm not asking you to shout them out. I'm just
but I've seen the ads on YouTube or whatever.
Okay.
I forget what it's called, but you can buy like a piece of a Warhol or I don't know. But same thing. You never see it. It just It shows up on your balance sheet, and
as it goes up in price.
Yeah, or most likely down,
Yeah.
right? 'Cause like 99% of art doesn't accrue in value, right?
Yeah, is that like a thing where like boomers, like all the boomer generation cars are no longer popular because like boomers are dying out?
Like
Like the values of like really fancy like Corvettes and stuff aren't necessarily holding because the people that really value those things. It's the same thing with guitars, like Gibsons. Like nobody's buying Gibsons anymore because Gibson doesn't have any like young artists. So it's just interesting when that happens. Like
what about lowriders? I guess is that a little later?
I don't know. Like lowriders, I think you can always just turn anything into a lowrider. I mean, and Impalas, I'm not saying like Impalas and stuff like that. I'm talking more like, boomer cars like C4s and stuff like that. You can get like a C4 Corvette for like $5,000.
Good to know.
Yeah. I mean, I would love one. I'm definitely going through a midlife crisis. So sorry to bring it into that.
Again, you're too young for that. But yeah, but I mean, so Mara's video is great. It's like very entertaining. Like it's almost like a Wes Anderson style. Like it's very like not slick, but like inviting and like quirky kind of. But she's great. Like it's. I mean, but I when I finished seeing it, I told the guy who runs Canary, I was like, that was like the most depressing video I've ever seen. I was like, it was the most depressing thing in like the most like enjoyable packaging. But that's an example of political art that is in a I mean, this is a nonprofit space or a non-traditional art space, but she's a contemporary artist, and but it's like taking the bull by the horns or whatever. Like it's.
Do you think that the idea of an artist so revolutionary that they change the world is like has ever been true? Like I mean, I know that like, okay, so I'll contextualize this. Like, cause when I was starting in school, right, in art school, all of us were like, yeah, we're gonna fucking stick it to the man. I remember really liking Hartfield, the Dadaist,
John Hartfield,
John Hartfield, and really being impressed by him and sort of the agitprop that he did for that magazine where he had like Hitler eating or people eating gold or something like that. Anyway, it was really impactful stuff, and all of that. But I just go back in history and I think about all the like super revolutionary artists, and they were always tied to institutions, right? Whether it be the church or the
Bauhaus.
Yeah, exactly. So is that, do you think that there have ever been any artists that were like so revolutionary that they changed the world? Because you get into a little bit of like the modernism, right? Like Jackson Pollock and stuff like that, and you start digging in and you realize that he was collected by the CIA and the FBI.
Well, they used him to spread American democracy around the world. Yeah.
Exactly. So, I mean, yeah, in a sense, it's revolutionary, but it's also propaganda, right? Or propagandistic in its. So, like,
not in its intent, but in its. It was used.
And
for that purpose,
even Susan Sontag, who's like one of our greatest writers, was like a CIA person as well, right? So it's.
I don't know if I knew that.
I think it's in the book Finch or something, or Fink. Maybe I forget. Anyway, I know that like I know that maybe we can leave that one up as disputed and possible misinformation that I shouldn't be spreading. But is there do you feel like that is the case? Because like I think it's easy to say like, okay, yeah, like Giotto was revolutionary in the fact that he painted sculpturally. Right. Or that the first 1 point perspective that like truly nailed it was a revolutionary piece. But that's more in the technical realm. Mm-hmm. Do you think that has there ever been a political artist that like, or an artist whose politics has had a meaningful impact in the way that maybe Jackson Pollock did, but without the help of a major intelligence agency. Is that too much?
I mean,
and I ask this just to sort of define what art means to us, because I think we have we still love it. It's not like just because of all these things being true, like it makes art any less valid or any less important.
no,
Yeah.
no. I think it's all part of understanding the complexity of art and how it functions, on an individual level, on a communal level, on a societal level. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, you could say somebody like Warhol, changed
That's one of the ones that I
the
was
way we
thinking.
look at art, right?
Yeah.
Or even Duchamp. But I mean, how many people saw that toilet, or the urinal? So in retrospect, it had a big effect. But yeah, it's tough. It's tough. I mean, well, it's just it's just like how, like what world are you talking about changing? What our society is so atomized, that like.
So it's a faulty premise, I guess. I mean, not that you're criticizing the question. I'm just meaning that way of thinking about it, right?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, what, Banksy?
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm.
So you
asking.
with Banksy, you're saying more of like just the more making art more accessible, right? Like to community people.
That's part of it. I mean, but there are a lot of like street artists who have done that. I think his straddling of the mainstream and the street world is probably more interesting or impactful.
That makes sense. Yeah, because I think that he is probably one of the people that straddles both lines that is in the mainstream consciousness. And it's interesting how he has a backlash to that too.
Oh yeah.
It's almost like he's naughty for.
I mean, he shredded one of his paintings at the auction house, right?
Yeah, which was pretty funny.
Yeah, although how much they were in on it is clear. But
I'm sure they knew.
Yeah.
I mean, either way, it doesn't matter because whoever got that piece is like super excited.
Yeah.
You could not have a piece that got more publicity of his, really, I think, you know? And I also think that part of it is sort of having that like, it's like there's a level of trolling to the art world, that I think is interesting that, like the banana and that piece, a lot of it is sort of, wasn't there somebody that just got sued for not delivering paintings? Or do you know this story?
Oh,
you might be more plugged into this.
I don't know I don't remember the specifics, but it was
someone just didn't make work, and then they tried to collect the money.
yeah, he got paid up front, and was like, me taking the money is the piece or something. Which is another focus on the financial networks that art is now just one more avenue for.
Would you say it's closely tied to like a financial system, or like, when we think in terms of the money behind it and whatnot, would you say that there are some art worlds that live in the financial sector?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, most of the art world is either wholly or partially tapped into art as commodity or art as investment. And I like, most artists are working artists.
Yeah,
like they need to get paid. So the idea that art as intertwined with capitalism or a capitalist society is not like a revelation or a bad thing, I would say.
But it's kind of shied away from in art school, right? Like I feel like
I don't know. You tell me.
Yeah, you haven't been to art school. No, my experience with art school is mostly, and it could be different for other people, but it's mostly that art school is training on how to have a practice, not how to succeed in the art world. which is an interesting thing. And I think honestly, you can tell me what you think. I'd love to hear somebody check my thought on this, but I feel like a lot of that comes from an academic sector that is mostly aspiring for tenure, right? And I think that while having a teaching job is a real job, it also separates you a little bit from, like, you know, the working man struggle a little bit. Does that seem fair? You can push back. I don't mind.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, there's a cycle of like teaching art students to become teachers to teach art students, right?
Yeah.
And like that's not totally sustainable in a lot of ways.
Oh no shit. Yeah, my parents were like, you just get an MFA and you can just be a teacher and you get 3 years off. And I'm like, now it's like a saturated market with parents that said the same thing. Yeah.
So I mean, and teaching is great, and great teachers are, you know, can be some of the most influential people in an artist's life. But you know, the fact that it is an industry and the fact that art school's unattainable for many and financially not realistic, you know, it's the system is, I don't want to say broken, but
it's a little wonky.
It's problematic, and that, you know, that taps into or dovetails with the whole idea of where artists live and how you know, just the whole fact of how you support yourself in America as an artist. And in LA, it's like, you know, there's definitely like a balancing act between a critical mass of artists and art workers and collectors and institutions that allows a healthy art ecosystem to happen. But if there's too much money, it tips, right? And so, you know, again, you want people to buy art, you want artists to be supported, but, you know, and in our correspondence before, I was talking about the graffiti towers.
Yeah.
Downtown. There are 3 half-built skyscrapers that dozens of graffiti artists covered in tags from top to bottom a few months ago. And they've been stalled for 5 years because the Chinese developer ran out of money, and they put $1 billion into it. It would take another $1 billion to finish it. And they were, from what I remember, I think the developer like expected them to be mostly like second properties for overseas investors. So they weren't even going to be lived in, most likely. A lot of them, they're which is like luxury condos, next
level gentrification.
yeah, right. You're priced out by a non-entity. Yeah. So I think that epitomizes this dilemma that a lot of cities are facing, where the drop off or the development of a balanced, rich ecosystem into one that's more of a monoculture, or more, you know, more based on speculation and real estate, and, you know, yeah, it's
no, it's an interesting thing that happened. And that's another one of those things that just kind of blew up and ties into the street art. I wonder. So I wonder how much. So I mean, Basquiat and Herring were kind of like the forefronts of this sort of movement to legitimize street art, right? I would say, like, especially like transitioning into gallery spaces and whatnot. Do you think that maybe the backlash towards like a Banksy is because it's been seen before, kind of thing? Or like I'm always interested in sort of that that relationship between street art versus gallery art, and like what gets elevated to that level, and what
yeah not. I mean, it's, you know, it's the conflict between commodification and something that can't be or is intended to avoid being commodified.
Yeah.
So like the thing about the graffiti towers is interesting for me because people are like, but is it good art? You know? And I'm like, I don't even know if it matters in a way, like the phenomenon is so much more meaningful than a critical analysis of it. And I mean, I think a lot of the pieces are really impressive and are like,
yeah, technically
good.
sound.
And I'm not a graffiti guy, so I'm not, but
You didn't start tagging?
with my limited experience of graffiti and street art. I was pretty impressed.
Well, it also, one of the things that's interesting about that is almost like it's the object itself, like the object itself is the art object, right? Like the building itself becomes the structure, right? And so to be able to transform a structure like that of that scale into something that it is not intended for, I think that speaks to what you're saying of like, I think you're missing the point here. The point it is a conceptual piece as well, right? Like it's not just graffiti on a building. It is a well coordinated effort through a community to sort of reclaim a building for strictly their aesthetic, their culture.
Yeah.
I really, no, I think that is a really good example of sort of this like marrying, because it's one of those things that like maybe the art world, the big capital A, top of the financial ladder art world could never really do, right? But they're fascinated by that strictly because of that, right? A white cube space can't make that happen.
Yeah, and it shouldn't. I mean, it's different intentions, different formats, different audiences. I mean, yeah, it's turning something that is representative of the failure of high-end speculative capitalism to provide for everybody, for citizens, for Angelinos who are terribly underhoused, for affordable housing at least, and turns it into something for everybody that you can see from like everywhere.
Yeah.
But again, like, artists gotta get paid.
Yeah.
How do you monetize that, or how do you make that feasible? And so like Lee Quinones, graffiti artist who came up with Basquiat, has a show at Charlie James now.
Yeah.
And so it's interesting to me like how, like, so he's not showing just tags or pieces that he would do on the street or on subway cars or whatever. So there is like a somewhat of a transformation to making objects that can be sold, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which, like, more power to him.
Yeah.
But it's just, I find it interesting how those operate in different spheres and what we expect from artwork in different contexts and different places.
Yeah. You just reminded me of, what's his name? Shepard Fairey, and his turning his work into a clothing brand, which is maybe like the most commodifying turn that I've seen a graffiti artist do, right? Like it almost kind of, I mean, I've talked to different people that have different opinions. I tend to think that it kind of makes the earlier work less impactful, but it's interesting how even my prejudices affect that perception, because I don't have a problem with Lee Quinones making the transition, or even what's it called, Banksy making that transition, but for some reason to make a brand like that just seems like it doesn't fit within the capital A art world. And I'm putting judgment on myself for feeling this way as I express it, but it is an interesting thing that like about perception that comes into these spaces, right?
Yeah.
Like almost like he was making something for a more mass accessibility, and I'm judging him for it because he's not in a fine art space. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because like those Andre the Giant stickers were all about.
I remember when they were coming out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There was such a like mystique about it because there was no internet, and you have to ask your friends and be like,
What is this?
"What the hell is this?"
Yeah.
Like, oh, this guy made like 2,000 of them for his RISD
Yeah.
thesis or whatever. But yeah, that's about accessibility and you know, early meme culture, I guess, and spreading things all over the place, and you know, clothing somewhat similar, right?
Yeah.
You know, I mean, especially like street wear.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's like, you know, identifies you as part of a tribe in a way.
Yeah. As a subculture.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, is there anything that maybe I haven't asked you about, or anything that, like, any last words of wisdom that you could impart on people? Oh, that's too much pressure. I saw your reaction. I apologize. but you know, like, as we wrap up, I don't want to leave you without the opportunity to say something that maybe you thought of that you didn't get out. And if you don't have anything, that's totally fine too.
Yeah, no, we covered a lot of ground, huh?
No, we've been all over it, and we definitely covered. And that's why I'm like, we covered everything we wanted to talk about. So I just
that was a lot.
Yeah. And I really appreciate it.
No, it's good. It's good. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. I just hope everybody. It's crazy. You know, things are crazy.
Yeah, things are definitely crazy.
Be safe. Be smart. Be empathetic. I like that.
Yeah. And humanize people.
Yeah. Yeah, it's gonna be a long year.
So.
Oh,
man, I just remember what's happening at the end of the year.
Oh man, so yeah, hang in there.
Yeah. Cool. Anything that we can promote for you? Do you have any news? Any stories that you got coming up? Anything that you've already published that you want to get some traffic to?
No.
Okay.
Just you know, I had the USC UCLA piece last week, and that's still happening. So I'm going to be presumably covering
more of it.
And
it's great coverage, by the way.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, it was. You know, it's important. And Angela, my co-author, I think did a great job, and she's continuing to cover aspects of it. And you know, I'm most interested, or not most interested, but I think for the publications I write for Hyperallergic, most interested in how art can be used or is being marshaled in service of protest or activism or solidarity. So if people are doing things like that, let me know.
No, a Jeep prop is definitely one of the things that I would say is probably one of the things that kind of does have a little bit of a staying power. You know, like we're always so bombarded with advertising and propaganda. One of the things that I love about Italy is like when they call commercials propaganda. And so like a commercial will pop up and it'll say propaganda on the corner of it. But like, yeah, for some reason that advertising is such a separate word, but yeah, we need to make our own propaganda, I think, especially when you're younger and you have like your whole life ahead of you and you feel really ambitious.
Yeah.
Don't let all what we're saying about the broader art world mean that you can't, like, you know, I think art on a local level can definitely be a productive exchange.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
No, it's crucial. I mean, one thing I will say on a recent story I did a small piece on this PBS show with John Lithgow.
Oh yeah.
Called Art Happens Here, which
he's going back to art school, right?
Yeah, it was, you know, I got the blurb about it and I was like, oh, PBS show, John Lithgow, like, oh, I don't know. And I watched a clip from it and I almost like cried. It was like,
wow.
I mean, I don't know if everyone had this reaction, but he goes to like 4 different schools in LA and learns alongside. He's actually mentored by the kids there. So like ceramics, and locking out of Flint Ridge, self-help graphics he goes to, W. Allen Dance Studio, and a high school in LA that does performing arts, and he sings. And it just like was really inspiring to just focus on like your first exposure to art, you know, not, you know, it's worlds away from like all this professional stuff we're talking about, but it's like so meaningful to so many people, even if they don't become artists. Like it's all about how you think about things, how you think about the world, how you see the world. So yeah, I would give a shout out to PBS. Art Happens Here. I thought it was really well done. It's like an hour.
Cool.
With four places.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to come. I am a huge fan, and I really appreciate, you know, you legitimizing me by coming on the show.
Likewise.
Yeah, we'll be back next week with another guest and another topic that may or may not be art related. Although I've started saying now, even, despite that outro, we are trying to talk more directly about art these days. So I hope you guys are enjoying the new stuff. Like, subscribe, comment down below if you have any thoughts. And thank you guys for checking us out. We'll be back next week.